One of the biggest problems of The Force Awakens that still persists for me personally is the characters. Now, as I already said before, the Star Wars movies are not particularly good when it comes to characters. This includes both the prequels, the originals, and of course the new ones. But when I saw that Greg Rucka was going to do a book called Before the Awakening, which I'm of course reviewing here, that would basically give you more insight into the backstories, into the lives of the three new main characters like Poe Dameron, Rey, and Finn, to help you better understand where they're coming from, to understand their personalities better, and to hopefully even like them more or start liking them in my case, I was pretty excited, particularly because Greg Rucka did a pretty good job with that Han Solo story, Smuggler's Run, which I reviewed a few months ago, and he's a fairly competent writer in his own right. Not one of my favorites, but still a pretty damn good one when he really clicks with me. So I was reasonably excited for this, just to understand finally why are so many people in love with Finn and Rey and Poe, regardless of the character of the actors' performances, which all of them do a good job. It's just that the people that they're playing aren't particularly interesting or well defined for me. And this book completely screws the pooch. All the problems I had with them in the movies are still present here and kind of cemented. So I'm going to start with Finn because his is, I guess, the most interesting of them all, but that's not saying much. Basically, Finn's backstory is that as a child, this is a First Order tradition, supposedly, where young boys, young girls, and young people in general are taken as babies or as little kids and are indoctrinated into the First Order, and they spend their entire natural lives, training to be stormtroopers or officers or any other number of jobs that the First Order wants them to be, so that they soak in the First Order propaganda. They are kind of emotionally stunted because they are taught to not show mercy, to not really show an interest into anything but serving the First Order. It's such a regulated society, quote unquote, that stormtroopers can't even laugh and have, menial conversations while they're on duty, like ordinary soldiers might, because their higher ups are monitoring what they say over the radio feed. And so it's a very, cold, very sterile sort of environment. And Finn, in this, as we see him, is still a trainee, and he is the leader of a stormtrooper squad. And as we see, Finn, as opposed to what he is in the film, he is a completely different person in this. The only thing that makes them similar is the fact that they both have a certain trait of compassion that is abnormal for stormtroopers, but the Finn that we see here is really different from the guy we see in the film. In the film, Finn is really sort of... he's always nervous. He's unnaturally natural, I want to say, around other people, which is weird because of his backstory presented here. He doesn't really come off as very competent of a stormtrooper, so much so that you can buy him being the janitor. But here, Finn is like fucking Master Chief, son. Like, out of 36 shots from his blaster bolt, 35 of those are gonna hit and drop a rebel. And there's a moment where he charges this bunker and he blows it the fuck up, and he's getting praise from everybody. Captain Phasma likes him. He's being called one of the best stormtroopers they've ever made. And while I'm reading this, I'm just like, where the fuck was this guy in the movie? Because this guy is cool. This guy, I can buy this guy as a stormtrooper. He knows how to be a leader. He knows how to obviously line up his shots. He knows how to blow up a damn bunker by himself. And I'm just running to myself, where was this guy in the movie? And he's not in the movie because Finn is a poorly defined character, and this completely cements that for me. The writers do not know what to do with this guy, and nothing shows this as well as Slip. So in his squad, there's a guy called Slip, who is the resident screw-up of the group. He's really nervous. He's always going to muck something up. He's the guy who's going to get his gun jammed. He's the guy who's going to leave his binoculars open and then get shot by a sniper or something. He's the screw-up. And he's also kind of the most natural of the group. He's the guy kind of willing to make the most small talk. He's the guy willing to, have a bit of he shows a bit more emotion and stuff. And when I'm reading this guy, I'm just thinking to myself, why the fuck wasn't Slip Finn? This is the guy I would buy as the Finn that we see in the film. The guy who's kind of nervous around everything. The guy who kind of who's more natural around other people, the guy who's a bit more of a screw up. But not Finn. Finn here is, like I said, Master Chief, and so it just doesn't work. They're setting Finn up as this hyper competent badass, but that's not the Finn that we see in the film. And there's also a really bizarre moment in the book where Finn is like being constantly praised and stuff, and Slip is considered the outsider. And then there's just this one moment, literally one moment where the whole book turns against Finn. Like one real stormtrooper, an actual soldier who's been on the job for a little while at least, he calls Finn an outsider, and everyone's like, oh yeah, Finn's the outsider. He's the guy who doesn't fit in. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, you just spent half the story setting up that this guy is Master Chief in training, at least. Like, this guy is the badass. Like, sure, he doesn't have a nickname, but he is kind of the guy who's respected by his higher-ups. He's the guy who gets stuff done, and none of his teammates hate him. But then there's just one moment where everybody suddenly acts like Finn is Slip, like he's the screw-up. He's the guy who doesn't belong here, and it just doesn't work. And then there's another moment at the very end of the book where Finn, after a certain mission doesn't go right for him, he goes into the simulation, and then he shoots rebel simulator drones or whatever, as usually as he would. But then he can bring himself up to shoot civilians. And this is really, really weird because it implies that Phasma never put them in a simulation where they had to worry about civilians, where they would intentionally put into situations where, to defeat the enemy, they would have to sacrifice civilian lives. And that's what the ending implies. Like, Finn has never been into this situation before, or he was able to act through the situation better. But once again, I don't buy it, because if this guy was really so nervous about, shooting people, he would screw up these earlier simulations with civilians in them. And then it also creates a problem for the film, because the film acts like Finn never acted up. Like, Finn was the unnoticeable. Finn was the guy you would never notice. You would never know he was there. He was probably so average that he just got past everybody, and that's why his abnormality as the First Order sees his compassion, would go past unnoticed. But in here, everybody notices him. Captain Phasma notices him. Hux notices him. Everybody knows who this guy is. There's like this big mega training simulation with a bunch of teams, and Phasma singles him out as the biggest badass of the bunch, and it just further cements the fact that the writers do not know what the fuck they wanted Finn to be. Why didn't they just make him the janitor? Seriously, why couldn't Finn have just been an ordinary engineer who saw what the Starkiller base was capable of? He was assigned to Kylo Ren's ship, and then on that ship, he's like, oh man, like, there's a chance for me to get out of here and maybe, stop Starkiller base. And then he does so. Like, why couldn't Finn have been that guy? Why couldn't he just be the janitor, for fuck's sake? Why couldn't you do that for him? Because that would have made sense with the way he's presented for the rest of this film, not this Master Chief in training type badass that Greg Rucka is writing him here as. And this is supposed to be canon. This is supposed to be Finn's actual backstory, and it doesn't make any sense for the character and the type of guy he is. And then there's Rey. Oh, fucking hell. I was really looking forward to Rey. Like, I know that they were going to give a Kylo Ren backstory because of his quote-unquote parentage and stuff, so I knew that he was probably going to be excluded before I even saw what the book was specifically about, which is a shame because I really want to see his backstory to figure out just why the hell this guy's even working for Snoke. But Rey is the second biggest one, because Rey is unbearably bland in the movie. Like, she has no personality trait except being hyper competent at everything, which is not really a personality trait, and wanted to go back to Jakku to wait for her parents. And then, as I'm reading the storyline, it's presenting a couple of cool ideas. That Rey is kind of an asshole. She's kind of a really loner. Like, she's really defensive of her own stuff, which makes sense because she lives on a world where you gotta fight every day. You gotta fight, to get scraps just to survive through the day. And so with that kind of mentality, I thought it was kind of interesting. Then they introduced some characters who she kind of has good relationships with. They're not particularly deep characters, but I kind of like them anyway. At least as how Rey was forced to play off of them being a loner. But then the entire message of the book is just to reinforce what we already know, that she's a loner who's waiting for mommy and daddy to come pick her up. Are you fucking serious, Rucka? Like, I'm convinced Rucka did not see the movie before writing this. I'm completely convinced that he didn't see the movie. Like, he was probably just handed a bunch of, ancillary bullshit that was like, here's what Rey is doing, and here's what Finn is supposed to be like, and here's what Poe is. And then he was just forced to, figure shit out on his own from there, which is really weird because the whole new expanded universe is propping itself up to be like this mountain of consistency, like this temple where everything is going to fit because there are these big architects looking over everything. And then when I see shit like this, it just makes me wonder, how much control do these guys have and how much are they allowed to have? And it's so fucking annoying. Like, this book really, like, this portion of the book legitimately pissed me off because it is an entire storyline crafted to have an ending where we're already going to be delivered on Rey's sole fucking character trait that she's waiting for mommy and daddy to bring her up. And then there's more stuff like her learning how to pilot ships. Like, she has a simulator to help her pilot the ship, and then she actually gets a chance to pilot an actual one. And a lot of people are using this to excuse Rey's storyline, to say why she's a good pilot. I'm one of those people who doesn't have a problem with her piloting stuff. I have a problem with her using the Force. And no, don't give me some bullshit of she has repressed memories, because unless Rey was like the most badass 9-year-old the Jedi Order, any Jedi Order has ever seen, there's no fucking way she should be able to outdo Kylo Ren at everything. Sorry, guys, I don't buy it. It's bullshit. No. It's not true. It is bullshit. And then there's Poe Dameron. Poe Dameron is, I feel, he's going to be a weird character for a while, because Poe Dameron was supposed to die very early on in the movie. He was essentially a plot device to get the ball rolling, to give BB-8 the information to get Finn onto Jakku. And then he was supposed to die in the desert, which is really fucking obvious when you watch the movie where Poe just disappears for like an hour and then he just shows back up with no explanation. The novelization for The Force Awakens actually does create this whole side story to show you how Poe survives, and that's supposed to be canon too, which was fine, I guess. But Poe is a character who was supposed to die. He was supposed to be a nothing character, but they kept him around because Oscar Isaac is playing him, and you don't want to sacrifice a good and rising star like that on a throwaway role where he's going to be in it for 2 minutes and then just die. And because he has a very charming personality in the film, I expected to see that come through here. But the storyline, once again, is not particularly interesting. It's about him defying orders to catch a ship that's been captured by the First Order. And there's a lot of old EU bullshit here where the New Republic is completely incompetent and stupid, which is fucking hell. It's something that the New EU ran into the ground and made into basically a self-parody. And it's not bad. I mean, it's all right. It's not particularly exciting. Poe is all right, I guess, in it, but there's not really much there for him. And that's really a shame, because I thought Poe was going to be the Han Solo of the new Big Three, I suppose, because he's the oldest of the Big Three. He was born about 2 or 3 years before Return of the Jedi, meaning he's like 30, 32, 33 when we see him in the film. And having been around for that long, I assumed that they were going to do some really cool stories with him, because there's a whole Han Solo trilogy in the old expanded universe, which is about the 10 years Han spent, in the Imperial Academy, and how he, became a smuggler, how he got the Millennium Falcon, and how he did all this kind of stuff. And he was the character of the Big Three where you could tell stories like that on, where you could have him go on these big adventures. And I thought that the same thing was going to be with Poe, that he was going to be the guy who had 1,000 storylines to tell before you even see him for the first time in The Force Awakens. And here, he kind of has a story to tell, but it's not particularly interesting one, and that's a shame, because he is the guy where you could reasonably give this guy a new trilogy. I mean, this guy is getting an entire ongoing series by Charles Soule and Phil Noto. I don't know what it's about. I don't know if it's about his backstory or if it's about in between The Force Awakens and Episode 8. I doubt that, so it's probably going to be his backstory. But it's very obvious that the writers are seeing the potential there, and they're going to capitalize on it in a comic book, but they're not going to capitalize on it here, which is kind of weird, because this is supposed to be the book that's supposed to sell you on these guys, to give you a better idea of who they are. And then, his parents show up from the Shattered Empire comic. They were all right, I guess, but I didn't particularly like the Shattered Empire comic because it's just whatever the fuck. So yeah, this is not a good book. This is, if you're someone like me who doesn't like these characters, you're probably not gonna like them even after reading this, and that's pretty much the only reason anybody should ever read it. The stuff that you see here is completely superfluous. It's probably not gonna come back to any of the later stuff. It's just there to basically exist, and that's it. And the very fact that all of these storylines are so either shit or throwaway just makes me wish this was all about Kylo Ren, because he's the guy whose backstory everybody wants to see. Like, this guy must know that Vader was not always Darth Vader, and that he betrayed the Emperor. So why is this guy modeling himself after the Darth Vader incarnation of his grandfather? Like, who is Grand Leader Snoke? Like, how did he seduce Anakin to the dark side? Like, there's all this stuff that is poorly exposited to us in The Force Awakens that is just waiting to be explored, and I really wish all these three storylines were acts and we just could have gotten a really big Kylo Ren story to properly explain his motivation, because I feel like he has the most potential of the new characters, but because The Force Awakens is fucking awful at exposition, we're left with a bunch of stupid information that doesn't really make sense and probably should and probably would if the writers were better at conveying them. And so, yeah, this is a throwaway book. Like, there's no reason for you to read this. If you're looking to get into the new expanded universe, please read any of the Marvel stuff before this. Read Gillen's Vader, read Aaron's Star Wars, read the multiple Charles Soule series like Lando, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and of course the Poe Dameron comic book. Just read any of that stuff before you read this. Hell, all the novels of the new expanded universe are better than this. Even the Luke Skywalker one that I didn't even like is leaps and bounds superior to this one. So yeah, guys, that's my review for Before the Awakening. Fuck this book, and fuck the three main new characters of the new Star Wars trilogy. Maybe they're going to get better, maybe they won't. I'm not particularly optimistic, but hey, I've been wrong before, and I'd actually like to be wrong this time too.